Welcome, Reanimated fans, to this week's episode of our podcast. I'm H.A. Conrad here in Brooklyn, coming to you on the East Coast, and on the West Coast is my intrepid co-host, Stuart Tiffin. Hello, Stuart. How are you in the land of fires?
Yo, I really don't want it to be referred to as that, but it is appropriate. I am alive. Thank you for asking.
I think, we'll do our typical stuff. We've got a lot more news items today than normally we would, which is kind of nice because I think it means that some things that we're getting kind of finished up and, people were trying to figure out what to do in terms of releasing them in theaters or online or whatever. I think that's probably happened. And so now it looks like the fall is actually going to be pretty busy, which is great. But today we'll be once we talk about the news, we'll be discussing Lovecraft Country episode 2, Whitey's on the Moon. And before that, we'll give our usual pandemic update, I guess. So here in New York, it's still pretty holding steady in terms of the case number. So it's a pretty, compared to where we were this past spring, everything's looking pretty good so far. There have been a lot of debates about going back to school. I know that there have been discussions about holding the public schools, their sessions outdoors. I don't know how exactly they're going to do that, but I know that this is something that is being debated. Apparently, this is something that was done during the pandemic of 1918, the flu pandemic. And so I'm curious to see what they do with that. But in general, all the discussions amongst my friends who have children have been, what do we do? Do we send them? Do we not? If
Right.
there's, and it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing on all counts. So my heart goes out to everybody who has to make these decisions. And then, I had a friend in the Netherlands, and then I saw an article backing this up where it's basically school is required, and they are kind of going at this in a very different way, actually a little bit more closer to what Sweden was doing. And they have been not faring so well, but they're required to send their kids back to school unless they can prove that there's some risk factor either for the child or for somebody in the family. They will get fined if they don't send the kids to school. So it's going to be, so I think you're going to see these stories kind of playing out. And I mean, we've seen this kind of theme playing out in all different states and forms. And again, I think it's very hard for parents to go to work when their kids are not in school, but also from a socializing aspect, I think this kids are really missing seeing other people. And does the risk of them going to school and potentially getting exposed or spreading this virus, that's the factor that you have to kind of think about, is like whether this is worth it or not. And again, it's also hard to get real information. I mean, I never thought I would see the day when the CDC was sort of making guidelines that were being impacted by a political agenda, because that's not what they're supposed to be about. But they made these like kind of weird new testing guidelines that were then quickly walked back after they came under fire. And it's really upsetting. But again, here in New York, we're doing our thing, wearing our masks.
You guys have like held the line on new cases, at least on the Johns Hopkins website, if we're still into that. It's like 700 a day and not much more than that. I mean, that's still not an insignificant number, but It's just been so consistent. That's what's weird about it.
Well, I mean, I think the fear, and I would agree with this, is that now that schools are going back into session, that there might be a spike. Also, there's been a lot of there's a lot of people that left the state, left the city, who might be coming back from areas that are hotspots. So there's concern that there might be a spike related to those kinds of things. Technically, you're supposed to quarantine. I have a feeling a lot of people are not. I think some people are being responsible. As I said, like when we went out of town, even though we were extraordinarily careful, that's what we did when we came back, and we're out of that that number of days at this point. And really, I think that's, this is the thing where I'm really having a hard time understanding why people are demanding, we want to dine indoors and we don't want to wear masks. Well, you know what? These are the things that I think have contributed to the lower numbers in New York. And you've got to have a critical mass of people following those rules and caring about other people. And that's how you get the numbers down. Just to give an example, as I've said, there's been few outliers in terms of people not wearing masks, but for the most part, it's rare to see people not wearing them. It's like my neighborhood apparently has a pretty high compliance level compared to other parts of the city and the state, but I think that's why the cases have been lower in my area than in others. So I think that the mask wearing is key. So,
Yep.
that was another thing about the Netherlands, is that they are discouraging wearing masks at any point.
What?
So that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
They're saying that it raises the stress level, and anybody who's contributing to this anxiety can so it's like, my heart goes out to my friend who has kids out there, because it's like, I don't know, like, how are you gonna do that, right? Like, it's just a hard thing. And then some other mom who was in the Netherlands wrote this whole article about it, which I was just like, oh, this is like, I think I would be really, really stressed if I were a parent and lived in the Netherlands right now. So, anywho. So how are things going out in California ways?
Numbers we're still the top of the heap. Go California. But it's almost, when you look at the breakdown by county, it's very southern heavy. It's Los Angeles, San Bernardino, San Diego, Orange, Riverside, all southern counties. And I don't know why that is, but we are certainly not out of the woods up here either. But the further north you go, the more sparse the population, and that, there's a direct correlation. And this is, and yesterday my son is asking his mother, can you promise me that our house isn't going to burn down?
Right.
And we're like, no, we cannot do that.
No, that's stressful.
So
Gosh.
Just add it to the heap of shit that we are trying to juggle in 2020, on top of Chadwick Boseman's untimely death, which hit me like a fucking brick wall.
I'll admit, I cried when I heard this, and I mean, obviously he kept his illness under wraps, and he was still doing things. Apparently he was still like visiting kids in hospital, while he was in the hospital,
promoting nonprofits, and
and I admit to you, it hurt really badly. So
it was just one more thing we didn't need, for sure.
Yep.
That's extremely selfish of me to say. The man is dead. His four friends and family, but he was a gift to pop culture, and to and so it feels his loss is very deeply felt. In California, however, we're down. It seems like actually as a country we're kind of on the far side of a big spike. As a nation, we are looking at more like sorry, I'm looking at the wrong numbers, but I think we are down from the days of 60,000 new cases a day to in the 30s and 40s, which is an improvement, if not still terrible. And then in California, we're down to like 5,000 or 6,000 new cases a day, which is also an improvement from when we were at 12. But it's still bad, and could still look worse. But honestly, when I go down the list and look at all the states, I don't see any states except for potentially Illinois spiking right now.
Well, that's good news, I think.
I hope.
I
don't know how until a vaccine comes around, the only way that we keep that from reversing course is through rigorous, just listening to the CDC and Fauci and doctors, epidemiologists, and following doctors' orders. And that's obviously, it's turned out to be something that we're not good at as a country.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. Well, on that note, so I say we jump into the news right now before we talk about Lovecraft Country, just because we got a lot to get through today. But there has been like a virtual cornucopia of zombie films that are going to be released this fall, which is great. So we've talked about a couple of these before. Alone, which is coming out on October 16th.
Yay! That's really the big news. They re-released the trailer. I think there might be a couple more seconds in it. But the big news is they have a hard release date, so that's great.
Yep, and this is the one with Donald Sutherland and a few other people, but he's the main person that stood out to me on this, just because it was like, wow, you got Donald Sutherland to do this movie. And this is, very similar to one we had seen before, where they're like in this main person, or at least the person you see in the majority of the trailer, is this guy in an apartment complex. Zombie apocalypse has happened. He starts communicating with somebody else, and his journeys through that. Although it looks slightly more. Is slightly more active than the French film that we saw that looked similar to this.
Night Eats the World. I get Night Eats the World vibes from watching this trailer too, and but it does feel like the blonde lady might not be a figment of his imagination from the trailer. So I'm going to hold out hope that he actually does have a friend.
Yeah. But, it looks... my only gripe is that I wish they hadn't shown quite as much as they did in the trailer, because I felt like they almost showed too much. But this is, what are you going to do? But in any case, I'm excited to see this. It looks pretty good, so I think that'll be a fun thing to watch. And then after this came on, I didn't see this, but you did. There was another trailer for a movie called Hall, which basically also coming out in the fall of 2020, and looks like it takes place in a hotel. It looks really creepy and disgusting. I'm not sure. I'm assuming the premise is that they're stuck in a hotel, and either the hotel is the source or they're just there during the outbreak of a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, hard to tell from the trailer, but very moody and atmospheric.
Yeah, there is a little girl that is reminiscent of the Poltergeist girl with the blonde hair and everything, Carol Ann.
A dash of Poltergeist, a dash of The Shining, yeah.
Yep. There's a little bit of all that going on. But I'm sure we will be reviewing that when it comes out. And then lastly, we also saw this in terms of movies. We also saw the trailer for this a bit ago, but it's #Alive, which is a South Korean zombie film, again in a apartment complex, or it starts out that way. Mm-hmm. This time with the main character, basically a gamer obsessed person, and then the zombie apocalypse happens. Apparently he hasn't gotten out all that much until this happens, and then he's forced to kind of deal with the zombie apocalypse. So,
and this is coming to Netflix.
Yeah, on September 8th, so pretty soon actually. I think earlier than the other two we just talked about.
That's in like 9 days, HA. Yeah. This is very exciting news considering
very exciting.
Where we've been. Yeah. So we will be eager to jump on all three of those projects when they're available to us.
Yeah. And lastly, and I saw this on Instagram as well, and I was very puzzled by it, but there is a very strange Fear the Walking Dead kind of teaser where Morgan's not Morgan and he looks weird, and I don't know what this is supposed to mean. But basically it's like, I'm not Morgan anymore or something.
Who does Morgan become is the tagline.
Yeah.
And this is, they showed some of these clips of him. His like eyes are completely red around the iris.
Yeah.
And it's, I'm not sure what we're supposed to take away from this. So the question is appropriate. Thank you, Fear the Walking Dead. Good question. No idea what Morgan is going to become. Is he a quasi-zombie now?
Yeah, like, what is this?
On the flip side, he has an amazing new beard, and so I'm very excited about that. He appears in the video he has muscles. He also has a bloody bandage wrapped around his torso, or just around the shoulder where he was shot. I mean, all of this should be prefaced and followed up with the statement that he should not be alive. He was full on shot in the chest in the middle of nowhere. So I'm really interested to see how they're gonna.
And let's just say the blood pool we saw, nobody would survive.
It was not just a pool; blood. It was like spurting. He had, I feel like arterial chest blood.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, it'll be very. I'm curious to see how they do this one. So we'll see.
So anyway, and so that we have that to look forward to.
We do.
And as I agree, I think this is going to be a shorter review today, but we're talking about episode 2 of Lovecraft Country, which is called Whitey's on the Moon. And I have to say, I was not as impressed with this as I was with the premiere.
Yep.
But I'm hoping that maybe they will redeem themselves with tonight's episode.
It had layers, so the show continues to show me that they think they put a lot of effort and thought into each of these episodes. It just doesn't always pay off. And in this case, I felt like what they were trying to do was maybe just too grand of a vision for them to realize, even though, or to be able to effectively storytell, because it did feel disjointed and a little bit weird. And there were some plot issues that I felt anyway. But overall, it was like, when you look at this from a storytelling perspective, big picture, you're like, wow, this is a crazy story that they're trying to tell here. And I think I just feel like it was a bit of a failure to convert, the extra point.
Yeah. I think part of the issue, and there's like a few things I noticed here, and I think part of this is because I did read the book, and the way the book is set up is that there's basically a series of not short stories, but each chapter or each sort of section of the book deals with like a different main character. So in this case, it's Atticus and this journey he has, and these same characters appear throughout, but the focus is on sort of a specific character story.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Christina Braithwaite character is actually a man in the book named Caleb, and he's throughout the story. So you still kind of see these threads wending their way through the storyline. I think what happened here is that they felt like they needed to give more context or make it more freaky, because in the actual book there was a lot of suggestion that may not be easily translated into like a film version or a television version of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that they had to make sort of the weird coven of devil worshippers or whatever they are. They had to make it seem more evil and more nefarious, and thus I think they got into some trouble, honestly. And I think some of this is what you're talking about, where it's like they almost tried to do too much. And I don't, and I think they wanted to make it more exciting, and I think that they wanted to make it very clear that there's things going on here, and there's things that you can do with like written stories that make it a lot more scary, just because they're not showing certain things, and I think you don't have that luxury all the time with a television show. So mainly what I'm talking about here. So in this particular section, they're at the mansion. They've basically greeted Atticus, and then they are sort of brought in as guests of this clan, and they are each, there's like different things going on. They're each kind of put into their separate rooms. I think you can pretty much, do the whole the path to hell is often pleasantly paved, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
And there's, so each of them has a room that has their favorite things in it to basically keep them busy. And
but
that
not
kind
Atticus,
of thing.
right? I mean, Atticus he seems to have a room just as nicely appointed as the other two, but also there it turns out that Uncle George and Letty are under a spell that made them forget their encounters of the night before. Right. But Atticus is sitting there thinking about the eyeball monsters, right, and can't get it out of his head. And so
right. And,
they're having very different experiences based on that.
And this is definitely an addition to this story. This was not the case in the book. They all were very much aware of what was happening.
Okay.
And, and then the other part...
At least, though, Uncle George and Letty to a lesser extent, but they are still distrusting of what's going on a little bit, right? Because they're still like, well, even though... I'm in a room full of books I love, and she's got a wardrobe full of great clothes, and they don't remember the monsters. They're still in a rich white person's mansion, and they know better than to be at ease there.
Right. And, and again, part of the sort of changing story in the book, Atticus is the one that actually has the books that he notices. Both he and his Uncle George have all these graphic novels and H.P. Lovecraft books in their room, but he's the one that finds the bylaws of whatever this organization is, the Brothers of the whatever Light or Dawn. And he's much more the sort of leader in figuring out what's going on. But I understand why they did some of this, and I think they want to make all the characters equally important. And then, but there was a lot more in the story where they're immediately looking for Atticus's father. And they, that is a much bigger part of the story. And I mean, they do it here too, but again, it's like they tried to crush a little too much into one episode, and I think it's because probably the next one they're going to move on clearly um, into the next sort of transitional chapter or whatever the book there is.
Okay.
So
So let's talk a little bit about some of the people who are new characters in this
right.
episode. The first one that I want to at least pay some homage to is William, the character of William, who is played by a dude named Jordan Patrick Smith, who you might not recognize. He has a bit of a resemblance to Alexander Skarsgård, but
Yeah,
he's
he's
not.
got a little of that going on.
He's got a
But
little
he's
bit of
not.
that. And in this, his hair has been bleached blonde, but he is from Vikings, which I don't know if you've ever watched that show, but it's a tremendous show from the History Channel with a great cast, and he's kind of a newer addition to that show. He's one of Ragnar Lothbrok's sons called Ubba, and he's very good in that role. And so it's great to see. I love it when I see actors taking on new interesting projects. And in this one, it's maybe a little one-dimensional so far. His character, he's just kind of like a very sneaky, as in like stealthy. He like creeps up on conversations constantly in this episode, and
Right.
and kind of just like a spooky Aryan dude.
Right, but he's also, his role is to kind of give them what certain rules are to sort of set the table in terms of what is
Yeah.
not what is going on, but what the norms are in this house. And one of the things is that he has to escort them. He tells them about certain types of dress, like for dinner. Oh, you have to wear tuxes. Oh, and also, by the way, women aren't allowed in the main dining room. And that kind of thing. And so you get a little bit of a set, you get some of the rules put in place by his character. And you don't, I mean, I think they definitely set it up that you don't really trust him because you don't know who his alliances are with. But he's definitely kind of like this escort or I don't know what you would call him exactly. I don't want to say narrator because he's not, but he
Yeah.
definitely is. He's a facilitator in terms of moving the story along so that you're getting a sense of what the rules are.
I mean, that lunch scene, it's just like a Q&A,
Right.
protracted Q&A with William, where
Right.
he's very, politely answering all their questions, but there is an edge of coolness to everything that he says to them. You certainly
Yep.
never trust him. They never trust him. And yeah, it's an interesting character, and I think he's still around at the end of this episode. Him and Christina,
He
I
is.
feel like they are.
Yeah.
So we'll see more of him, and I'm looking forward to it. And then Christina is the other one who I think is worth introducing here too, who will probably be along more in the season. She is
Yep.
played by Abby Lee, who's an Australian model, I guess, based on her Wikipedia. But she's also been in a lot of movies like Mad Max Fury Road, Gods of Egypt, which was a disaster, The Dark Tower, which was a disaster, and others. But well, I think she's doing a good job in this. She is a little bit ethereally beautiful, and I think that lends itself well to this role that she's playing. And she's also just like a kind of a like a sarcastic, too smart, and she's a witch. And you're not really sure what to make of this character, I think, in this episode.
Right. And they set her up to be, kind of a thwarted heir to her father because she's not a man. And so that's part of why I think they introduced the whole women men thing.
And a good
in
counterpoint
this.
to Atticus, who is also one of these too smart for his own good kind of people. Like I think they're gonna
Right.
be fencing a lot in future scenes. It seems like.
And again, she knows all the rules of this world. She is, she has rescued them in different portions. She is not, again, it's hard to trust her, but again, you have the only person that's willing to give you any kind of information. So she also is one of these people giving them somewhat of an idea of what's going on. But she is playing the game most certainly. So, even she's taking, even when she takes them to meet her father, there is an air of, well, yeah, I'm going to take you to meet my father, but there's definitely, you don't get the sense that she really likes her father. So it's, there is, you get the sense that there is some room to negotiate with her to some extent. But that she also knows this world a lot better than them. So not that they trust her, but they are trying to get information out of her to the extent that they can. And her father is played by Tony Goldwyn. I almost didn't recognize him mainly because I guess in my head he still looks like the dude that was in Ghost, which is ridiculous since that's like many decades now.
My counterpoint to that is I almost felt like he looks very, other than having blonde hair, he's in great shape for an older guy. He kind of looks the same to me.
Yeah, I guess I haven't seen him in a while. I saw him on Broadway, but that was from a pretty far distance, and he looked pretty good to me. This is just me being, it took me a moment. Um, but we've got this basically set up into this house of horrors, which he is the orchestrator. He's very perfunctory in terms of like, well, okay, here's my daughter. I'm gonna just give her some kind of acknowledgement. And then it's on to business. And he's very clear about the fact that he views Atticus as necessary, but it's like a transactional thing. And it definitely doesn't bode well for Atticus. And basically, they need him for this ritual because he is the lone blood link to the original founder of this brotherhood, or the great grandfather, whoever that was.
And Atticus and his posse need them because they think that there's a connection to Montrose Freeman. Right. And so they keep asking, like, where's my dad? Where is he? And they're like, oh, he was here. And he went like on a, I don't know. What was the explanation William gave? Like, he was
in Boston. He was in Boston. Yeah. And it's clear that he's not in Boston. And the other part of this is that what we have found out is that the reason why Atticus is the lone carrier of this bloodline is because his ancestor had been raped by the owner of the house, by the original Braithwaite guy. So there is that aspect too. So it's sort of like not only are you going to treat me terribly now, but also the whole reason why I'm even tied to you is because of something horrible and evil. And this is a theme right now that is being played out. Definitely, this is Lovecraft Country was made a couple years ago, but it seems to be very much on point with some of the things that are being talked about now, which is, in terms of the Black Lives Matter and just the history and talking about that history and being honest about that history. Mm-hmm. There's this like weird thing where they were like, oh, well, he treated his enslaved people really well and all this like kind of weird stuff.
He was infamously, what was it? Yeah, it was something. It was just a euphemism for he had sex with his slaves.
Right. And then in addition to this, there's all sorts of weird stuff going on these lands. I mean, we already knew there was something weird about the house. There's like this strange town that seems kind of out of time. Like everybody's dressed in these like very dated clothing. Again, I don't feel like this feels like it's in New England to me. It feels like much like a different place, and it might just be because of the vegetation and things like that. But that's sort of my gut on this, is that it doesn't feel New England-like, but maybe it's not supposed to. I don't know.
Well, it's. I'm pretty sure it's all shot in Georgia.
Yeah,
based
it
on
feels
the final
like...
credits, it has that Georgia film thing at the end. There's some Canadian link too with this show, and I don't know if that's just for rights to show it in Canada. But I have a feeling, and based on, I've seen enough Walking Dead to know what backwoods Georgia looks like, right?
Right. And that's why it just sort of doesn't read, because it's not. Yeah. And then you've also got just sort of like the general tone when our three heroes are walking around. They are not wanted. You feel how like they do a very good job of making them feel unwelcome and also scared, because there's like all these weird undertones happening, like when they come across the people in the village.
This like weird Amish village that's just out there. What's weird is most of the people just ignore them. Like they don't even react to their presence, right. Which is curious in and of itself.
Except for the dog woman, who is terrifying, and
she is. It's weird that they like introduce another character just as evil as the sheriff in the last episode, or evil in such a similar and like repetitive way. I don't know. I felt like that character could have used a bit of a tweak. It was just too much of the same. I mean, and maybe that's just me looking for variety when it was literally just that like that, and that's, racist people don't tend to come in lots of different flavors,
And this particular character, I was surprised at that too. I also thought the same thing, and especially because in the book she is not this. She is something else entirely.
Hmm.
And actually, like, kind of, it's jarring because she's basically walking around. She's also somehow, she either has powers or she's like similar to William, where she's like a servant to them, but she's also dressed like, she isn't dressed like this. She's
Hmm.
like, she's basically dressed in like a dress and like seems sort of out of place walking around with these dogs, which is why it's a little bit jarring, because it's like, but you know, I don't know if they were trying to make a, like, to differentiate the people in the house and the people outside the house. I don't know. So in any case, she's creepy, and racist and
And she
like,
has this whistle that they heard
yeah,
when they were being attacked by the eyeball monsters in the end of episode 1, and she uses it in the town, which is kind of what sends Atticus into, I mean, and he does kind of fly off the handle when he hears this whistle, because he's also bugging out because Letty and George don't remember anything, and he's starting to like lose it himself, because he's like, why am I the only person who remembers this? There's the whistle, I'm gonna go find out what it's about. And he kind of goes at her, and then she responds in a similar sort of very hostile way.
yeah. And then, you know, the mechanism where like George and Letitia don't remember any of it is, I mean, it's kind of annoying because it's sort of like they forget the things the minute that they see them.
That was, I thought, actually kind of interesting when they get attacked or approached again by the eyeball monsters, because they're out in the woods after dark, and the monsters are there. The whistle blows, the monsters run away, and right away George and Letitia look down at their clothes and go, "Oh man, it happened again, didn't it?" And I thought that was actually like a nice way to approach that, instead of just. And Atticus is just speechless. He's just like, oh, man. So I kind of enjoyed that part, but the episode is also like getting weirder and weirder as like at that point, which is about the halfway point, it just goes into crazy town, because then we meet Christina. We go into like, it becomes clear that they're just prisoners at this point.
Yep.
And we go into the hallucination scene, which is extremely weird.
Yeah, and not part of the book, by the way.
Okay, and
So,
and they're also apparently just being watched during their hallucinations by the rest of these members of the lodge, and it's starting to feel very creepy.
yeah, I mean, I think they're trying to make the Brotherhood seem like, look, as I said, like certain things translate better visually, and I think what they were trying to get at here is that, first of all, magic is involved, or some kind of like, you know, nefarious mystical powers. And so basically George and Letitia, and Atticus are all having these like bizarro hallucinations. And then, you know, and they're pretty creepy, all of them. Like George, and they are sort of socializing the idea here that George and Atticus's mother had a thing, because that's who he sees, and she had died. And then
Okay, it's explained. Well, in the Wikipedia write up, that they say that that's his ex-wife Dora.
Oh, okay.
Who was
Sorry,
dead.
I
But
misread that.
I didn't know who this woman was, and it didn't become clear to me in watching
Oh,
it.
so I
wasn't
misread it because I didn't read the Wikipedia entry to it. But
sure. That might be wrong. That's written by a volunteer. You know, that's not written by HBO, so it might not be
I
correct.
don't know. But in any case, he calls it out and knows that she's not what it is, and that sort of dissipates.
I was glad to see that George still kind of he knows what's going on in most of the time.
And he then finds the bylaws for the Sons of Adam, and sort of is the one that has sort of a linchpin of an idea later. But and then Letitia, unfortunately, has this horrible vision of like Atticus, and they're getting it on, and you know, his penis is a snake, which is really like weird. And that's sort of, you know, that's just, for me, I'm like, yeah, I don't know that was necessary. And Atticus is having visions from when he was in the war and killing, you know, he had some pretty horrible things happen to him, and apparently is still being haunted by that. And said, you know, that he killed people and he killed women and children, and he is still, I mean, he's suffering from PTSD on top of everything else. And he actually then confronts, once he gets out of his like kind of crazy visions, confronts Christina about all of this, and basically, you know, demands that Letty and his uncle remember everything, and she does it, and then they're all like miserable. So that's like a weird thing. And he also they have this whole thing where George is the one that reveals that, just without question, that Atticus is the person of this bloodline, and sort of exercises his power by forcing everybody in the all the other brothers of Adam to leave the house. So he does have some level of power amongst them, even though they're pissed about it. And there's all this stuff sort of like layering what the dynamics are here, and ultimately, they eventually do find his father. But it's like a weird little journey into a like kind of a dungeon like atmosphere. And his, he it's Michael K. Williams, so he's always going to be great.
This was the part I wasn't following entirely, because they go down, they knock out the sheriff, or Letty knocks out the woman they're calling the sheriff, the woman with the dogs, and then they're like, they say Count of Monte Cristo and take some rocks out of the wall and see a tunnel, and then next thing we know, Michael K. Williams, or Montrose Freeman, is digging his way out of the earth, and they're all standing there like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, there's a lot of dots here that I don't feel like are connecting for me as an audience member.
I think that they tried to crush a little too much into this episode.
That was that was the main point where I felt like it was 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag, and I'm just like, I don't know, we could have spent more time on this prison breaks concept. Correct. And maybe less on
the hallucinations. Yeah.
Hallucinations, black tie dinners. I don't know. You needed that scene to establish this link and the power he has over Sons of Adam, but it was also a little bit like,
yeah, agreed. And then, it really gets crazy. And again, this is a very big change actually from the book, where they make an escape, they make a break for it, and the car is basically stopped by some kind of a force field. And in the book, Montrose is approached by Caleb, who I guess is the Christina character now, and he has a gun, but she takes it from him and she shoots him, but it's really an illusion. But he still feels as if he was shot, but he is the only one that is shot.
Oh, weird.
And in this, it's basically both George and Letty are shot, and so that's like a very different twist on this. And I mean, I guess they're trying to draw that connection between Atticus and Letty and why he would do some things. He's definitely got a complicated relationship with his father. And it's interesting that like his dad is like, and they established this, his dad and his uncle are half brothers, but they have had, his dad has had a pretty rough life. He got beaten. And they sort of reveal this, and all of this is done in sort of a different way in the book. And I almost think a slightly more successful way, because you hear about Atticus's treatment by his dad from Atticus, and they did that a little bit in this. And you hear about how his father was mistreated by his father from Uncle George to Atticus.
There was a scene for that in episode 1.
Yeah, and they do a little, but I think they're trying, they have this whole dialogue between George and Montrose to try to talk about that again, and just to sort of establish something. But then they introduce a whole different piece to this, which is that George is basically implying that he might be Atticus's dad, which is something entirely out of, this is definitely off book. And that may be, and so there's some complicated things going on here. And George is suffering from a bullet wound. So is Letty.
But Letty's magically healed. Yep. And what I don't get about this suggestion that Montrose or George might be Atticus's dad, wouldn't their blood then be closer to the blood of Titus?
Right.
I don't understand why it's Atticus when they've got 2 other scions who are closer up the chain to Titus.
Well, right, and that's what's sort of unclear.
It doesn't make sense to me.
But anyway, but I guess the blood comes from the mom who had died. So,
okay.
Yeah, because she's the line. And that's the whole thing that I don't think they did a good job at sort of establishing here. So one of the main storylines in the book, which makes it so much more clear about why the bloodline and why everything else is happening, is because she never wanted to talk about her ancestry. Montrose was always one of those people. He was like, no, we got to find out about it, and wouldn't stop. And she told him just to leave it alone because she kind of knew. And she knew that she came from this side of things and didn't want any involvement because they were evil. And then Montrose wouldn't let it go. And of course, might have been helpful if she had just told him, and then he could have avoided it.
And so this has never been his birthright, despite
No.
the fact that he wrote about that in the letter, which it turns
Right.
out he was writing it under duress to get
Right,
Atticus
right.
to come, so that the Braithwaites could get Atticus to come to Artem.
Right.
Okay, so that makes sense, but it's still a little confusing when you're like, okay, so this is Montrose's birthright. Oh, but wait, no, it's not.
Right. And so I don't think they do a great job at establishing that in this show. And then, but with Letty's or Tisha's injuries and George's injuries, basically Atticus is blackmailed into performing this ritual, which otherwise he wouldn't do. It's very clear that it's not going to be good for him, the ritual, because, the last person who did this blew up and blew up the house. And that seems to be what they're expecting for the most part, except they're just expecting him to blow up versus the house. And
well, they certainly weren't expecting it to go that badly, because there's a lot of the Sons of Adam in the room wearing their weird robes.
Yep.
And Samuel Braithwaite is there chanting his language of Adam, or whatever it's called.
Yep.
And this is a very interesting scene production-wise, because they play the spoken word piece, Whitey's on the Moon, during this scene, which talks about, like, people experiencing real world problems meanwhile, white astronauts are on the moon, and what
Right.
good is that doing for my sister who just got bitten by a rat,
Yep.
etc. And it's a really thought-provoking piece. It's a great piece, but it's playing over this unraveling ritual, and that makes it for some really interesting, television for me.
Right. And then you also see all these different visuals coming through. And specifically for Atticus, he is, it seems, powerless at first. And then he pulls out this other thing, and they do like a bit of a voiceover, a bit of a flashback with Christina telling him that he can actually change the ritual and change what's going to happen. And he starts seeing visions of his ancestor.
It seems like some power is coming from the ring that she had given him. Yeah. So
Yep.
she more than likely has undermined this ritual to create the disaster that is what happens.
Right. And in the book, Caleb / Christina, whatever you want to call it, gives him a spell written on a paper that he hides in his via William. So it isn't even from that character directly. It's like William kind of like sneaks it in. And he hides it in sort of the corner of his robe. The ring thing has nothing to do with this. So
Okay.
I think they wanted to make it a little bit more fantastical and more as if it was innately something about Atticus, which is fine.
It's a very fantastical scene, which culminates in Samuel and the other Sons of Adam being turned into pillars of salt, it looks like.
Yep. And
then the
Atticus
destruction of the house.
is led out of the house by his ancestor and discover, the whole thing just collapses, and basically Christina and William are not in the house because they probably knew what was going to happen, given that she gave him the secret ring, the Dakota ring or whatever. And then he's relieved because he didn't know that his relatives were out of the house. So he didn't know that George and his dad and I guess Letty, who's not relatives, but he sees them. And then this is like the part where I'm not sure. I'm hoping that they don't do this, but it seems as if they are killing off dear old Uncle George, and I'm not sure if that. I'm hoping that there's some kind of miraculous Morgan survival thing here happening.
They've already killed off Letitia this episode, so it does feel a little bit like deja vu. Okay,
right.
Oh, another one of our traveling companions has died. Okay, well, we'll just wait until the next scene where they are raised from the dead.
Right, but he plays a pretty significant role in other parts of Lovecraft Country, so I don't know if they're just going to if they're going to kill him off and have Montrose take over that, or if they're going to bring him back miraculously, which I'm wondering if that's what's going to happen tonight, but we'll see.
Everybody on the cast is certainly reacting as if George is dead. He might just be passed out. We'll see, right?
We'll see. But I will be sad if Courtney B. Vance exits the show this early on, because I also really like his character a lot. But in any case, there's, I don't, as I said, it felt like a kitchen sink kind of an episode where they had to throw everything into this to sort of establish and get this particular story wrapped up. I feel like it could have been a little bit more streamlined, and but I also understand why they made certain decisions, and if they are in fact, which it seems like they might be doing, changing the storyline a tad, maybe they felt like they had to do this, and maybe they felt like there had to be a lot more action somehow because there wasn't as much. I don't know. So we'll see how this.
Yeah, night and day, like very different episode from the first, and maybe that is just to keep the audience on their toes, and we'll find out because the next episode is actually airing tonight, August 30th, right? And so we will talk about that the next time we get together, and hopefully, and from other critical response that I've heard, this is not other folks' favorite episode, and that it really picks up again after this. So I'm hopeful for the rest of the season. Me
too. And I mean, as I said, I don't think I would have. I didn't enjoy this episode as much, but I understood more of it because I had read the book, but most people have not read the book, so that's the other part too, which is, so we'll see what they do with this next one, but I have high hopes that it'll be a good one. So let's see what happens. And, until next time, thank you for listening. And if you'd like to give us your thoughts about this episode of Lovecraft Country, send us a tweet at Reanimated PCast on the Twitters. You can leave us a note on our page, reanimatedpodcast.com, or you can send us an email at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, ciao.
Thank you for listening, and goodbye.